Okay.
The Declaration. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves, by study and otherwise, to be the better able to help and teach others. The true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all.
Thank you. We'll touch on the fundamental propositions now, the three fundamentals.
Do you want me to pull it up?
I'll do it.
You do? Okay, thank you.
I started on top of page 14 of Secret Doctrine 5, Volume 1. We find three fundamental principles that work together as one. They apply to nature's laws as presented throughout the secret doctrine and as we learn about them in nature. And the first fundamental is on deity, the unity of all existence, the rootless root of all that was, that is, and never shall be. It extends to beyond the range of human comprehension and can only be dwarfed by inhuman expression. It is beingness rather than being, and is thought of as the great breath, the one reality. It is the dynamic energy that might be linked to that small voice that wells up within every individual soul, that consciousness that should be our guide. Spirit matter, soul, life, embodied and unembodied, all are all within this proposition. What people generally call God or deity is an aspect of life, the omnipresent principle which invisibly functions in the atom as in the cosmos, and which abides as itself in the heart of every creature. Another aspect of life is law. People speak of the laws of God and the laws of nature. It would be more accurate if we speak of God as law. God, life, self are not different from law. They are law. The spirit of the universe all surrounds us and is within all of us and sustains us. We eternal pilgrims have the opportunity to become gods or one with the absolute through sustained effort. We honor the gods as superior beings to emulate, but not as beings outside of ourselves. The second fundamental is on the law that brings out an analogy between the processes of nature and the cosmos and an individual man. Day and night, life and death, sleeping and waking, karma and reincarnation are just a few of the aspects within the second fundamental. Man's lower principles disintegrate in time, and nature uses them again with their various imprints from past uses to form new human principles. The same process takes place in disintegration and formation of worlds. There is a potential exchanges of atoms correlating and changing their combining equivalents like the perfect flower dying in order to grow into a perfect fruit. Man himself punishes and rewards based on his deeds. As above, so it is below. The third fundamental is on evolution. The whole order of nature is progressively marching towards a higher life in the cycle of incarnation or necessity. No spiritual Buddhi or divine soul can have an independent conscious existence before the spark from its essence has passed through every elemental form and has acquired individuality, first by natural impulse, from natural impulse from the mineral and plant and to the animal up to the human stage. Thereafter, we progress by self-induced and self-devised effort, checked by karma, up to the holiest archangel, or dynamic Buddha. Each entity must have won for itself the right to becoming divine through self-experience. The physical evolves gradually from the spiritual, mental, and psychic. Elementals are all future man. No one has ever reached adeptship in one embodiment. Each man has within himself of an adept and can evolve into an adept through self-induced and self-devised methods aided by karma to the extent allowed by aided by methods, masters of wisdom to the extent allowed by karma. Our devotional reading is from the Voice of the Silence, starting on here on page 68. Remember, thou that fightest for man's liberation, each failure is a success, and each sincere attempt wins its right reward in time. The holy germs that sprout and grow, unseen in the disciple's soul, their stalks wax strong at each new trial. They bend like reeds, but never break, nor can they e'er be lost. But when the hour has struck, they blossom forth. But if they can't be prepared, then have no fear. Henceforth thy way is clear, right through to the barrier gate, the fifth one of the 7 portals. Thou art now on the way that leadeth to the Diana Haven, the 6th, the Bodhi portal. The Diana gate is like an alabaster gate, white and transparent, while within there burns a steady golden flame, the flame of prajna that radiates from Atma. Thou art that vase. Thou hast estranged thyself from objects of the senses, traveled on the path of seeing, on the path of hearing, and standeth in the light of knowledge. Thou hast now reached the treaty state, O Narjo. Thou art safe. The paths are 2, the transformation 3. 6 are the virtues, and transform the body into the true knowledge.
Welcome, friends. I'm going to share my screen. Just let me know if you can see it. Just a sec.
I see it.
Yes, you can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, today's talk is on Lao Tzu and the Tao, and bear with me, I'm not always knowing how to pronounce some of the Chinese words, but I have a lot of them on the slides, so hopefully we can follow along. So Lao Tzu, also written as Lao Tse, Lao Tzu, and Lao Zi, meaning old master, is one of the most enduringly popular spiritual teachers and sages. The archetypal wise old Chinese man figure, his book known as the Tao Te Ching, also written Tao Te King, Tao Te Jing, has been translated into more languages than almost any other book in history, in existence. Lao Tzu is not referred to by H.P.B many times when compared with the frequency with which she speaks of other great spiritual teachers such as Gautama Buddha or Krishna, but she does talk about him in such a way as to warrant our attention. In the Theosophical glossary, the entry for Lao Tzu, she says he is a great sage, saint, and philosopher who preceded Confucius. It is indeed believed that Lao Tzu may have been a teacher to Confucius. Confucius was also called Kung Fu Tzu or Kung Fu Tse. But certainly Lao Tzu and Confucius lived contemporaneously, and they may have met on more than one occasion. Both lived approximately 2,500 to 2,600 years ago, though this timing has been the subject of some scholarly dispute. Not much is certain about Lao Tzu. His name means the ancient master or old master, and it's a reverential title rather than a name. According to Sima Qian, an historian who wrote the Shiqi historical records about 100 BCE, Lao Tzu was born in the village of Chujian, located in the ancient state of Chu, now part of eastern Hunan province. His name was perhaps Li, and according to Sima Qian, he was appointed Shi, or historian, at the imperial Chou Court. Although the word Shi came to mean historian in Lao Tzu's day, it referred to one who had mastered astrology and divination and was the custodian of sacred books. H.P.B's glossary entry for the Tao Te King, the only surviving book we have of his, says this title, Tao Te King, literally means the book of the perfectibility of nature. It's a kind of cosmogony which contains all the fundamental tenets of esoteric cosmogenesis. He said that in the beginning there was naught but limitless and boundless space. All that lives and is was born in it from the principle which exists by itself, developing itself from itself. That is what we call in theosophical parlance, swabhavat. As its name is unknown and its essence is unfathomable, philosophers have called it Tao, which we in Theosophy might call anima mundi, the uncreate, unborn, and eternal energy of nature manifesting periodically. Nature, as well as man, when it reaches purity, will reach rest, and then all become one with Tao, which is the source of all bliss and felicity. As in the Hindu and Buddhistic philosophies, such purity and bliss and immortality can only be reached through the exercise of virtue and the perfect quietude of our worldly spirit. The human mind has to control and finally subdue and even crush the turbulent action of man's physical nature. And the sooner he reaches the required degree of moral purification, the happier he will feel. And that was from the H.P.B's glossary. It's interesting to note that there is the implication that Lao Tzu both knew and to some extent taught the esoteric doctrine, Theosophy in its fullest and broadest sense and meaning. Like numerous other great teachers known to us throughout the ages, he had apparently been initiated into the sacred knowledge and divulged as much of it as was deemed fit for his time, place, and circumstances. In this regard, we find in The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, the phrase, the esotericism of Lao Tzu. And in an article known simply as Editorial Appendix, she mentions that from Lao Tzu down to Haiyuan Tsang, their literature, referring to the Chinese, is filled with allusions and references to that island, Shambhala, and the wisdom of the Himalayan adepts. In the introductory to the first volume of The Secret Doctrine, much is said about the intriguing fact of the many missing texts of esotericism. Lao Tzu, among others, is mentioned, with H.P.B saying, quote, the collective researches of the Orientalists, and especially the labors of the late years of the students of comparative philology and the science of religions, have led them to ascertain as follows. An immense, incalculable number of manuscripts, and even printed works known to have existed are now to be found no more. They have disappeared without leaving the slightest trace behind them. Were they works of no importance, they might, in the natural course of time, have been left to perish, and their very names would have been obliterated from human memory. But it is not so, for as now ascertained, most of them contained the true keys to works still extant, and entirely incomprehensible for the greater portion of their readers, without those additional volumes of commentaries and explanations. Such are, for instance, the works of Lao Tzu, the predecessor of Confucius. Lao Tzu is said to have written 930 books on ethics and religion and 70 on magic, 1,000 in all. His great work, however, the heart of his doctrine, the Tao Te Ching, or the sacred scriptures of Tao Te, has in it, as Stanislas Julian shows, only about 5,000 characters, hardly a dozen of pages. Yet Professor Max Muller finds that the text is unintelligible without commentaries, so that Mr. Julian had to consult more than 60 commentators for the purpose of his translation, the earliest going back as far as the year 163 BC. During the 4.5 centuries that preceded this earliest of the commentators, there was ample time to veil the true Lao Tzu doctrine from all but his initiated disciples. The Japanese, among whom are now to be found the most learned of the priests and followers of Lao Tzu, simply laugh at the blunders and hypotheses of the European Chinese scholars. And tradition affirms that the commentaries to which our Western sinologues have access are not the real occult records, but intentional veils, and that the true commentaries, as well as almost all the texts, have long since disappeared before the eyes of the profane. The reference here to Japanese followers of Lao Tzu is likely an allusion to the Yamabushi, also written Yamabushi, who are mentioned a number of times by H.P.B. There is a Wikipedia page about them describing them as Japanese mountain ascetic hermits. In The Secret Doctrine, after explaining the esoteric teaching about our moon actually being the parent of our planet Earth, our Earth, the reincarnation of the moon, we find it written that, quote, this is one of the 7 mysteries of the moon, and it is now revealed. The 7 mysteries are called by the Japanese Yamabushis, the mystics of the Lao Tzu sect, and the ascetic monks of Kyoto, the Zenadu, the 7 jewels. Only the Japanese and Chinese Buddhist ascetics and initiates are, if possible, even more reticent in giving out their knowledge than are the Hindus. Theosophy teaches that both the human being and the cosmos are comprised of 7 fundamental aspects or principles. In the Key to Theosophy, H.P.B remarks that Lao Tzu in his Tao Te Ching mentions only 5 principles, because he, like the Vedantins, omits to include 2 principles, namely the spirit, or Atma, and the physical body, the latter of which, moreover, he calls the cadaver. In the book A Modern Panarian, there is an article called Occultism or Magic. This was first published under the title A Few Questions to Hieraph in the Spiritual Scientist magazine of July 1875, 4 months before the Theosophical Society was founded. The article, which is worth reading and which is quoted from at length in The Hidden Origins of Rosicrucianism, was H.P.B's first public mention of her connection with the Brotherhood of Adepts. She wrote about the Eastern initiates in much more specific and detailed terms later on, but in that article she shares some perspectives on Confucius and Lao Tzu. And this is a quote: Hieraph, that being the pseudonym used by the writer to whom she was responding, sins likewise in a certain comparison he makes between Christ, Buddha, and Confuci, or Confucius. A comparison can hardly be made, she says, between the two former wise and spiritual Illuminati and the Chinese philosopher Confucius. The higher aspirations and views of the two Christs can have nothing to do with the cold, practical philosophy of the latter, brilliant anomaly as he was among a naturally dull and materialistic people, peaceful and devoted to agriculture from the earliest ages of their history. Confucius can never bear the slightest comparison with the two great reformers. Whereas the principles and doctrines of Christ and Buddha were calculated to embrace the whole of humanity, Confucius confined his attention solely to his own country, trying to apply his profound wisdom and philosophy to the wants of his countrymen, and little troubling his head about the rest of mankind. Intensely Chinese in patriotism and views, his philosophical doctrines are devoid of the purely poetic element which characterizes the teachings of Christ and Buddha, the two divine types, as the religious tendencies of his people lack in that spiritual exaltation which we find, for instance, in India. Confuci, or Confucius, has not even the depth of feeling and the slight spiritual striving of his contemporary Lao Tzu. Says the learned Enna Moser, the spirits of Christ and Buddha have left indelible eternal traces all over the face of the world, but the doctrines of Confucius can be mentioned only as the most brilliant proceedings of cold human reasoning. Unquote. Confucius, however, is spoken of more highly and positively elsewhere, even being called a fifth rounder in the Secret Doctrine. This expression is an allegorical term designed to indicate one who, even in this current fourth round period of evolution, has reached inwardly a stage of development that will only be normal for the average mass of humanity in the next great evolutionary cycle millions of years from now. It's true that a fifth rounder is not necessarily highly evolved spiritually for the fifth round, although they could, of course, be. As also the fifth root race relates to the development of the fifth of our seven principles, namely manas, the mind and intellect. The Secret Doctrine gives Confucius and Plato as examples of fifth rounders, and Buddha and Adi Shankaracharya as sixth rounders. However, if Confucius was a fifth rounder and not as great or as spiritual as Lao Tzu, his potential teacher, then we may perhaps suppose that Lao Tzu was himself a fifth rounder or even more. Many translations exist of his Tao Te Ching. In the ULT, an edition first published in 1951 by Theosophy Company is generally used when the text is read from or studied in meetings. But this version is not actually a textual translation, and so is not as literal and exact as some others, nor does it contain the entire Tao Te Ching. Instead is an abridged rendition made by Lionel Giles, and also named Treatise of the Way and of Virtue, and focuses on portraying the original ideas more than is an original translation. It also groups various statements from the Tao Te Ching into sections based on general theme or subject matter. In the original and complete Tao Te Ching, there are two sections. First, Tao Ching, meaning literally book, Ching of the way, Tao. And then Te Ching, book, Ching of virtue or power, Te. That virtue or power is what is implied to arise from attunement with the Tao. Hence, the book in its entirety is known as the Tao Te Ching, which does not actually literally mean the book of the perfectibility of nature, as H.P. Blavatsky said in the glossary, but rather the book of the way and of virtue. Taoism is associated with the famous Yin Yang symbol, and that symbol is technically called Taijitu. For what it represents is also called Taiji or Tai Chi, which means the harmonious interdependent duality or polarity of manifestation, composed of the yin, feminine, black, and the yang, masculine or white, in the symbol. The essential meaning of the symbol is virtually identical with that of the interlaced white and black triangles which form part of the Theosophical seal. And from that Taiji, the 10,000 things, a symbolic term used frequently in the Tao Te Ching to refer to the entire collectivity of manifested existence, arises. But prior to the Taiji is Wuji, symbolized simply as a plain white circle. This Wuji, or simply Wu, is Taoism's emptiness or voidness, the ultimate absolute, infinite source of all, or as H.P.B expressed it in the Theosophical glossary entry, using language more familiar to students of Theosophy, limitless and boundless space. All that lives and is was born in it, and from the principle which exists by itself, developing itself from itself. Wu or Wu-ji is therefore not a nihilistic nothingness or a void. This void is such as that characterized in the voice of the silence, where it is called the voidness of the seeming full and the fullness of the seeming void, translated by H.P.B from the Book of the Golden Precepts. Since Tao Te Ching is in part, as H.P.B said, a kind of cosmogony which contains all the fundamental tenets of esoteric cosmogenesis, it is perhaps not surprising that we find in it the universal timeless concepts of the absolute and the logos. Although naturally those specific words do not appear in it, there is Wu, emptiness, voidness, the eternal Tao, the Tao of non-existence, non-being, the unmanifested, static divine, or the absolute. And Taiji, literally the great polarity, the manifested Tao, the Tao of existence, being, the manifested dynamic divine, or the logos. So there's the eternal Tao, unaffected by anything that comes from it, and then there's the manifested Tao, like the periodic manifestation of the universe. The term Wu is linked with one of the most fundamental practical concepts in Taoist thought, Wu Wei, which means literally empty action. This does not mean inactivity or idleness, or not bothering to do anything or make any effort, but it refers to a type of action which is really non-action. And while this sounds like a contradiction, we find much the same idea in the karma yoga inculcated by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, particularly in its 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th chapters. There, Krishna, the avatar, teaches his disciple Arjuna on the battlefield and says, yoga is skill in the performance of action. No man can, even for an instant, remain really actionless, as everyone is inexorably propelled to action by his innate propensities. But he who, controlling the senses through the mind, uses the organs of action without becoming attached towards sense objects, thus practicing the yoga of action, gains excellence. Therefore, without attachment, always perform action which needs to be done. For by acting without attachment, a man attains to the supreme. And the voice of the silence also talks about, the action and inaction. In the Gita, it says, he who sees action and inaction in action is wise among men. Even whilst accomplishing all action, he remains established in yoga. And he whose undertakings are all devoid of desires and false imaginings, and whose actions have been burnt up by the fire of wisdom, him the wise call an adept. And that really encapsulates this same idea of wu wei. As well as wu wei, or empty action, Taoism also speaks of wu nian, literally empty thought, meaning a type of thinking which is really non-thinking, and wu xin, empty mind, the mind which is really no mind. One will also find such concepts in Zen Buddhism, but whereas some teachers and practitioners equate such ideas to literally trying to extinguish one's ability to think and maintaining a blank, vacant, inactive mind at all times, real esotericism proposes that something deeper and more powerful and mystical is meant, such as in the voice of the silence, where it says, till then, a task far harder still awaits thee. Thou hast to feel thyself all thought, and yet exile all thoughts from out thy soul. To return to Lao Tzu's life, it is said that when Lao Tzu realized that the Chou dynasty was in an irreversible decline, he decided to leave China, declaring that life amongst barbarians, who at least were innocent in their subliterate life, was preferable to life amidst educated degenerates who could wantonly sink below the level of animal existence. And that referred to the, people in the imperial court. He left for the West, leaving the culture and civilization of China behind him. Upon coming to a mountain pass, the Xianku Pass, which marked the boundary between Chu and Qin, he rested at the gatehouse with a few disciples who were traveling with him to the border. There, Yin Si, the Quanling, or guardian of the pass, reverently approached Lao Tzu and lamented the fact that he had never been able to descend from his post into Chu to hear the master's teachings. He begged Lao Tzu to write out a motto that he might engrave on his consciousness for life. Taking pity on the faithful and neglected servant of Chu, Lao Tzu called for a brush and paper. Within a very short time, he wrote out 5,000 Chinese characters, comprising the brief text called the Tao Te Ching. If the story is to be believed, humanity owes to the compassion of the sage and the earnest plea of a forgotten gatekeeper one of the richest treasures and most sacred books. After entrusting his treatise to Yin Si, Lao Tzu continued on his journey, having bidden his disciples farewell. Sima Qian remarked simply, the historian from long ago, remarked simply, no one knows what became of him. He noted, however, that some Taoists believed that he lived at least 140 years, and others said he flourished for more than 200 years. Long after Lao Tzu disappeared from the world of men, he came to be considered divine. As Lao Chun, Lord Lao, he was revered, and Taoists held that he had taken on many forms throughout history, only one of which was Lao Tzu. When Buddhist monks came to China to disseminate the teachings of Buddha, they found Taoists both their most sympathetic listeners and most adamant foes. Soon they heard a remarkable story. Lord Lao, who as Lao Tzu had vanished in the West, had journeyed to India, where he was known as Gautama Buddha. Though initially surprised, some Buddhists willingly made use of the Taoist tale to further their own work. Although Taoists, Confucians, and later Buddhists vied for the hearts and souls of the people, all joined together in veneration of a being who effortlessly transcended claims of relative greatness and doctrinal disputes. Whatever traditions the Chinese have followed, Lao Tzu has remained like the unchanging Mount Meru in their midst, reflecting from its snowy peak that spiritual light which transcends time and conditions, yet suffuses both with its eternal truth. The Tao Te Ching beautifully captures the subtlety of ancient Chinese thought. The verses can be pondered at several levels. It is traditionally divided into 81 chapters, which are further organized into two sections, one dealing with the Tao, literally the way, and one dealing with Dai, usually translated virtue, but conveying the idea of moral force or power. And there are several different versions of the text, but each contains about 5,000 Chinese characters. It's interesting that the 81 also, like 8 plus 1 equals 9. And I believe the Gita has 18 chapters. And there's been some comparison between the two, and that the 18 and 81, both equaling 9, are significant. But the title of the book has been translated as The Classic of the Way of Power, The Book of the Way and Its Virtue, and The Book of the Perfectibility of Nature. As the various translations of the title suggest, the text encompasses metaphysical precepts, but also practical advice. Despite the diversity of subjects touched upon, the entire text is crystallized in its enigmatic first chapter, which harkens the theosophical student to the familiarity of the first fundamental proposition of theosophy, deity or absolute. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the source of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of the 10,000 things. Desireless, one may behold the mystery. Desiring, one may see the many manifestations. Though one in origin, they emerge with distinct names. Both are mysteries, depth within depth, the threshold of all secrets. The Tao is a mystery because it's the origin of all manifestation and therefore transcends any category of thought arising from and used to comprehend the manifested world. Tao is also an impenetrable mystery because it is pure, unlimited potentiality, the source of everything existing and possible, yet therefore is not any one of those things itself. It may be compared to similar expressions such as Parabrahm of Hindu thought or the voidness, shunyata, of Buddhist thought. Because of its nature, it cannot be expressed in language. Hence, Lao Tzu taught that the Tao which could be named is not the eternal Tao. The Tao is also enigmatic. Many passages are susceptible of quite different translations. Not only does this offer a challenge to any translator or reader, but it also leads to a feeling on the part of many that they know what it really means, whereas others have missed the point entirely. In fact, Lao Tzu encourages this attitude when he says, "My words are easy to understand and easy to practice, yet no one under heaven understands or practices them. My words have an ancestor, my deeds have a Lord. Precisely because men do not understand this, they do not understand me. Because those who understand me are few, I am greatly valued. Therefore, the sage wears a coarse woolen coat and carries his jade underneath it." To have an ancestor and a lord was to be part of the social order. That is to say, not to be like an uncivilized man. Here, it is a metaphorical way of claiming that the Tao Te Ching contains a coherent teaching. The last line is a metaphor to say that the teaching is, however, hidden under an apparently rough exterior guise. And these lines make it an important point for those who cannot read Chinese, and one should be cautious about citing any translation uncritically. It's almost like they're suggesting that everybody reads it at the level that they can understand and takes from it what they can based on their understanding and knowledge. The viewpoint that the Tao Te Ching offers is so strikingly different from our normal way of thinking that it causes us to sit back and reassess our own viewpoint, especially in the realms of metaphysics and interpersonal behavior. Again, Lao Tzu alludes to this when he writes, "When the best student hears of the way, he practices it diligently. When the average student hears of the way, he half believes, half disbelieves it. When the foolish student hears of the way, he laughs out loud. If he didn't laugh, it couldn't be considered the way." This is true of most really profound teachings. And that's why theosophists find the Tao Te Ching a book well worth careful and repeated study. But in terms of those who have studied and translated this book, would they say it's the work of a single author? If so, one would expect to find its ideas coherent. Or could it possibly be a compilation of what one translator calls Laoist sayings? If so, one would not expect consistency, but rather occasional contradictions. The feeling of Dr. Richard Brooks, retired professor, theosophist, and translator, after 40 years of studying the book and reading numerous translations, is that the Tao Te Ching is at least generally coherent. Even if it is a compilation of Laoist sayings by someone calling himself Lao Tzu, they form a generally consistent whole. In Dr. Brooks's opinion, there are basically three approaches to the text. One assumes the book to be primarily mystical or metaphysical, and certainly many passages support that idea, including the opening chapter. Another assumes that the Tao Te Ching is predominantly a socio-political treatise. Again, numerous passages support that interpretation. And in addition, almost all early Chinese philosophy was socio-political in nature, so that would fit into the general pattern. And finally, one can find support in many passages for a philosophy of a personal action, an interpersonal way of relating. All three interpretations may be correct, and there's no really conflict between them. Hence, the viewpoint is that the book was written on multiple levels. Although important metaphysical ideas are scattered throughout the Tao Te Ching, most of them can be found in the Tao, or first section of the book. The first idea is that nature is unitary, one coherent, mysterious, interrelated ground of being, such that it cannot be delineated or described in language, but only apprehended in a desire-free, transcendental, unitive experience. Something there is mysteriously formed, existing between heaven and earth, silent, still, standing alone, unchanging, all-pervading, unfailing. It may be regarded as the mother of heaven and earth. I do not know its name. I call it Tao. If forced to give it a name, I call it great. Being great, it flows out. Flowing out means far-reaching. Being far-reaching, it is said to return. The Tao that can be told of is not the unvarying Tao. The name that can be named is not the unvarying name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The named is the mother of the 10,000 things. Therefore, ever desireless, one sees its essence, but ever desiring, one sees its manifestations. These two are the same, but after being produced, have different names. This may be called a mystery within a mystery, the gateway to all essences. And this second verse on the right is that first one that was read a little bit ago that said that the Tao that can be told is not the eternal. And so it's like a slightly different translation, but it still comes across. So the second idea is that nature or Tao is cyclic. Returning
Hey,
is the
Kathy,
movement of Tao.
can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Are you advancing your slides or?
Yeah, are they not?
No, at least,
No, I
Oh,
was
no.
wondering about that.
yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
Oh, yeah.
No, thank you for
Okay,
telling me.
now we can see it, yeah.
Okay, let me just click through them. I'm so sorry. I'll just back up. Well,
It's on us, so we should have brought to your attention, so, sorry.
I was bringing so much attention to what you say.
Yeah.
Looking on
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so that was the Yin Yang symbol, and this is Wu Wei, the ground that of the absolute, and then the idea of empty action, empty thought, empty mind. The first fundamental proposition is found in the Tao Te Ching in the very first chapter. Some of these are phrases he said. I'll catch us up to where we are. Okay, that's what I just read. Nature or Tao is unitary. The first fundamental proposition. The second is that the Tao is cyclic. Returning is the movement of Tao. Weakness or yielding is the method of Tao. The 10,000 things are born from being, and being is born of non-being. This, too, is a common theosophical idea. And so also is the third characteristic of nature, that it is impersonal, and it's not partial to any human or human beings. Heaven and earth are not humane. They regard the 10,000 things as straw dogs. The sage is not humane. He regards the 100 families as straw dogs. The 10,000 things in Chinese means all things, and the 100 families means all peoples. Certain ancient Chinese ceremonies in China used dogs woven of straw, and during the ceremony, these straw dogs were treated with the greatest respect. But after they had served their purpose in the ceremony, they were discarded and trampled upon. So that's the idea that he's relating of the impersonality of nature, and that it's not partial to any person, and the sage is not partial to any person, that there's this certain impersonality. And this runs through all the major philosophical Taoist writings. Manifested nature is dual, having two aspects, and these are indicated in one passage by the familiar terms yang, more frequently called heaven or tian in the text, and yin, or more frequently called earth or ti. But
Kathy, the slides are not changing again.
Yeah, I haven't.
Sorry.
I'll put it to the next slide when the next slide comes up. Can you see nature or Tao is impersonal?
Yes,
Yes.
we see slide 12.
Okay, great. We're in the right place, and I'll go back in a minute, I guess. Okay, so there's the idea of yang and yin, but a closer reading of the text shows that these two dual aspects of manifested nature are but different aspects of a more fundamental energy called qi, which is one. The 10,000 things carry yin on their backs and embrace yang in their arms. And by blending the qi, achieve harmony. The secret doctrine has passages in which the one absolute reality, the rootless root, beingness, or parabrahm, is called that essence which is out of relation to conditioned existence and is said to have two aspects: absolute abstract space and absolute abstract motion, the latter also being called the great breath. H.P. Blavatsky further says that once one passes from this level of abstraction, duality supervenes into spirit or consciousness and matter. So Yang then would be the equivalent metaphorically to spirit and yin to matter, although they are often interpreted as also sky and earth. And the idea is that they're two sides of one thing, or this universal energy, qi. Lao Tzu mentions a Trinitarian aspect to nature in the Tao Te Ching. The manifested one not only gives rise to two, but two in turn gives rise to three, and thence from three to the 10,000 things. Such a aspect of the creative manifesting side of nature is a common theme in many of the world's religions. The secret doctrine also identifies three logoi, the third of which is called the universal world soul, the cosmic noumenon of matter, the basis of the intelligent operations in and of nature, and which sounds very much like the same idea expressed in the Tao. We look at it but do not see it. It is termed elusive, or evanescent, minute, formless, invisible, yi. We listen to it but do not hear it. It is termed inaudible, or rarefied, si. We touch it but do not feel it. It is termed intangible, or subtle, infinitesimal, way. Lao Tzu uses a number of interesting metaphors to describe the Tao. Interesting because they are not what one would expect in a, he came from a male-dominated, material valuing society like ancient China was. In this sense, the female, the infant, water, a valley, bellows, an uncarved block, and some of these metaphors, unpainted silk, aptly convey the idea that nature is without show, without ego or preconceptions. Rather, it works best when it draws the least attention to itself, when it nurtures without expecting accolades, is empty, simple, humble. It follows then that to be most effective in one's interpersonal relations, we should strive to imitate nature. Nothing under heaven is softer or more yielding than water. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, here we go. Nature or Tao is impersonal, or it's not partial. I might be confused where I am now. All right, we talked about the 10,000 things. And now, yeah, we should strive to imitate nature in our personal relations. Nothing under heaven is softer or more yielding than water. Yet for attacking the hard and strong, there's nothing better. It has no equal. That the weak overcomes the strong, and that the soft overcomes the hard, everyone under heaven knows, yet none are able to practice it. Therefore, the sage says, he who suffers humiliation for the state can be called a ruler worthy to offer sacrifices to the gods of earth and millet. He who takes upon himself the misfortunes of the state can be called a king worthy of ruling the empire. Straightforward words can seem paradoxical. But we cannot practice humility, for that would make it self-conscious and unnatural. To attain this state of humility or lack of egocentricity, We must empty ourselves of our preconceptions and conceits. We must become like a valley or a bellows. We must practice what Lao Tzu calls emptiness. Empty yourself of everything, hold firmly to tranquility. Again, we do this because this is the way nature works to accomplish its creative purposes. Tao is empty, yet use will not exhaust it. Like an abyss, like the ancestor of the 10,000 things, is not space between heaven and earth like a bellows? While empty, it is never exhausted. Much talk inevitably leads to exhaustion. Whoops. The more it works, the more it yields. Much talk inevitably leads to exhaustion. Better keep to the center. So in this way, we should, he's recommending we should imitate nature and in the way it functions creatively. And this leads us to perhaps the most puzzling term in the Tao Te Ching, in Chinese, wu wei. The word wu is a negation, not or without. And the word wei as a verb means to act or do, but it could also be a noun meaning action. And we talked about this earlier. Wu wei is often translated as non-action or inaction, but that gives a slightly misleading impression of its meaning, because the term wei has the implication of purposeful, self-conscious, or pre-planned action. Its opposite is not a lack of action, but spontaneous, creative, unself-conscious action. So when Lao Tzu is read, when the Tao Te Ching is read with this in mind, his recommendation for interpersonal relationships becomes quite intelligible. The way is constant in inaction, yet nothing is left undone. If kings and nobles were able to maintain it, the 10,000 things would transform of themselves. If, after transformation, they desired to act, I would restrain them with nameless simplicity. Nameless simplicity is free of desires. Without desires, they would be tranquil, and the empire would be at peace of its own accord, or would correct itself. The phrase translated nameless simplicity is literally without name, like the uncarved block. As noted above, the uncarved block is one of Lao Tzu's several metaphors for the Tao. Another passage develops this same idea, where it says, in the pursuit of learning, every day something is acquired. In the pursuit of the way, every day something is dropped. Less and less is done until non-action, wu wei, is achieved. When one achieves non-action, nothing is left undone. The empire is ruled by not interfering. If one interferes, one is not worthy of ruling the empire. Here, the notion of non-action is applied to learning, which in the Chinese implies the study of ancient, largely mythological history to extract moral lessons from it, and the study of the rituals of proper social behavior so as to become refined. To develop this attitude of selfless, spontaneous non-action, Lao Tzu recommends a technique that sounds very much like the withdrawal of the senses from sense objects we see in the Gita, and in Patanjali's stilling of the activity of the mind in the Yoga Sutras. Lao Tzu recommends close the passages, shut the doors, and to the end of your life, your strength will the withdrawal. Open the passages, increase your doings, and to the end of your life, you will be beyond help. Block the passages, shut the doors, blunt the sharpness, untangle the knots, soften the glare, become one with the dusty world. This is called profound union. Commentators generally acknowledge that the passages and doors mentioned in these quotations are the apertures through which the senses acquire knowledge. So these could be our senses, eyes, ears, so forth. Lao Tzu further recommends that we do away with all distinctions or value judgments. He reasons that since our concept of good is always associated conceptually with bad, if we want to get rid of the bad in the world, we must eliminate the concepts of both good and bad simultaneously, relying on our inner nature to make us naturally, unself-consciously good. This is best illustrated in a passage that at first seems very paradoxical. It says, "When all under heaven know beautiful as beautiful, there arises the recognition of ugliness. When all under heaven know good as good, there arises the recognition of not good. Thus, being and non-being produce each other. Difficult and easy complete each other. Long and short contrast each other. High and low support each other. Sound and voice harmonize each other. Front and back follow each other. Therefore, the sage handles affairs by first reading and spreads teachings without words. The 10,000 things arise, and he doesn't turn away from them. He nurtures them, but doesn't possess them. He benefits them, but doesn't expect gratitude. He accomplishes his task, but doesn't claim credit. It is because he doesn't claim credit that it lasts forever." One can understand Lao Tzu's point better by realizing that one cannot have a world in which everything is one extreme or the other. Like, not everything can be long or high. That makes no sense. Long only exists in contrast with short, high with low. By making value judgments like "you're good," we keep conceptually alive the contrasting judgment "you're not good," the very thing we are trying to eliminate. So the truly enlightened person must teach by example, staying always in the background, refusing to accept reward or punishment, transcending the pairs of opposites. This leads to another important recommendation, that we come to interpersonal situations with an open mind, that we listen to what others are saying instead of trying to insist on our way through such situations by imposing our preconceived opinions or notions, that we approach everything equal-mindedly. Lao Tzu says, "The sage has no fixed mind. He regards the people's mind as his own. Those who are good, I treat with goodness. Those who are not good, I also treat with goodness. For goodness is attained. Those who are sincere, I treat with sincerity. Those who are insincere, I also treat with sincerity. Thus, sincerity is attained." The sage, when dealing with the world, is one with it. His mind harmonizes with that of the people. The people turn their eyes and ears to him, and he treats them as his grandchildren. Lao Tzu seems to be saying we should be like nature, which doesn't boast of its magnificent creations, or like the sage who stays so much in the background that the people are unaware of his or her contribution. The best ruler completes his task, finishes his affairs, yet the people say, "We did it ourselves," or "it just happened." Lao Tzu identifies what he calls his three treasures or jewels, and this is one of the last quotes. "I have three treasures I hold and cherish. The first is compassion. The second is frugality. The third is not presuming to be first in the world. Being compassionate, one can be courageous. Being frugal, one can be generous. Not presuming to be first in the world, one can become a leader." Now, trying to be courageous without compassion, trying to be generous without frugality, and trying to be a leader without humility is sure to end in death. For compassion brings triumph in attack and strength in defense. What heaven wishes to preserve, it surrounds with compassion. So to conclude, there is much of interest in this little book, the Tao Te Ching, and much is of immediate relevance to our own dealings with other people. A compassionate, humble, non-judgmental, open-minded attitude is important for everyone to adopt towards others. And attempting to still the mind with daily meditation is highly desirable. We could all benefit from practicing yielding when in a confrontational situation, since meeting hostility with hostility accomplishes very little, if anything. We need to meet it with compassion. It certainly does not, hostility does not resolve a tense situation. And even if we were to prevail, the person we prevail over is surely left with resentment. As the Tao Te Ching points out, when great enemies make peace, some hostility is bound to remain. Tao, the law or principle, is transcendental unity, one without a second, manifesting as universal harmony. And there is an exact correspondence with this ultimate reflected on each plane of existence and being, as Swan Te, the mysterious power, which is the radiance, so to speak, of the Tao. The Tao says, man follows the earth follows heaven, heaven follows Tao, Tao follows its intrinsic nature. And this intrinsic nature is spontaneity seen in the man of self-knowledge and good timing. With mathematical precision, any attempt to break the harmony of nature is an effort to deny the spontaneity of the Tao, the knowledge and the good timing. And the consequences can only be disintegration and destruction. That's why Lao Tzu could say, "What others teach, I also teach. A violent person will meet a violent end. This is the core of my teaching." So that tranquility, which is the invisible signature of the sage and the arduous goal of the aspirant who would cleave to Tao, is inseparably linked to Wu, non-being. Humanity drifts away from the Tao, not because it is involved in being, but because it fails to recognize the critical role of non-being within being. Clinging to one, the hall of balance, it is unbalanced, caught in an endless struggle to right itself. So Lao Tzu provided the solution in a simple but telling analogy. He says, 30 spokes share a single hub, and the central void makes the cartwheel useful. Clay is molded into a vessel, and the empty space makes it valuable. Doors and windows are cut out in the walls, and these openings make the room livable. We benefit from being, we avail ourselves of non-being. And in the last two lines of the Tao Te Ching, he reminded humanity how this is to be done. The Tao of heaven is to help without hindering. The Tao of the sage is to serve without striving. And with that, we'll conclude the presentation on Lao Tzu and the Tao. And we'll open up to questions, and I can go back through the slides if that would be helpful.
I have one comment. Thank you for the presentation. It was amazing. You said that Lao Tzu, the constitution of men for Lao Tzu was just 5 components. And I wonder if because the Atman of the Absolute is not really incarnated in man, but it's shining. that could be one of the reasons for the upper triad. But as for the corpse or the body, I don't have an idea of why it was omitted from the Constitution of Man. And that's one comment. And I have a question. You said that Buddha and Sankaracharya were of the sixth round, and probably Lao Tzu was of the fifth. Do we know all Jesus? In which round was he? Although this is not part of this conversation or presentation, but I was wondering that. Thank you.
Sure. Your first comment, Lao Tzu wasn't the only one to not include the physical body, because it's not really a principle in and of itself. It's considered like the vehicle or the casing. So I think the Hindus also did not consider it a principle. There are different enumerations of the 7 principles. And H.P.B outlines in the key that like the Vedantins only had 5, and also that Lao Tzu only seems to refer to 5. In terms of the rounders, H.P.B said that Confucius was a 5th rounder, so the supposition was that Lao Tzu as his teacher may have been a 5th or potentially even a 6th rounder. But she does mention that Buddha and Shankaracharya were, and their message was more universal. She doesn't say if Christ was a 5th or a 6th rounder, but she says, the ethics of Jesus and the Buddha are identical, but Jesus came to more like to a specific group during his life. But of course, his teachings have spread worldwide. And the New Testament is very, has the same ethics that of the Buddha, which is, selflessness and turn the other cheek. And so we don't know for sure whether he was a 5th or a 6th rounder, but it seems probable that as an adept who was initiated into the secret science and was able to teach on multiple levels because he spoke in parables, that he was, one of the teachers of humanity and would definitely be more advanced than your average person. I think it's likely to say he was, possibly a 5th or a 6th rounder as well, but I don't know. Sorry, it went over.
It's the book that you mentioned a couple times. The Upanishad for the Tao Te Ching. That's just bits and pieces of what he put out, I believe, of their interpretations of people's interpretations of what he said. Anyhow, it looks pretty accurate, but but I had never heard much about Tao until you said it. This talk today. Thank you for the great amount of information. It also in management, you're supposed to maybe throw out some ideas, but try to get people invested in where you're going. And I think that's what Tao is saying. He says you is a good leader sits in the background, and they might throw out an idea. Like he put a lot of ideas out there, but it's up to us to figure it out and do what is necessary to implement those ideas.
Yeah, he makes a lot of like references to imagery, like I think a bellows that starts a fire, it like things like that, or water, like water is what dissolves rock or something hard, and everyone knows this, but they fail to apply those analogies in their behavior or in, so I think sometimes the paradoxicalness of the things he's saying kind of like shocks your mind a little bit into thinking about it a little differently. You get used to thinking in the same grooves. And then, reading some of the passages with the paradoxical imagery, kind of like, wait a second, that makes total sense,
So Kathy, really excellent talk. Maybe we could pick this as a future book of devotion, one of these, because it seems as though there are parallels between what Tao taught and what's in Upanishads as well, in terms of the oneness and also looking inward for the source of knowledge. And so, did you also notice that as you studied this topic?
Yeah, I noticed a lot of parallels. I probably mentioned too many because it went over time, but there was a lot, and it's definitely interesting to see the comparative aspect, because it just reinforces what H.P.B says, that this the message of theosophy is essentially, that thread that goes through all religions of those same truths that appear everywhere in all religions and philosophies. And it definitely came out in the Tao, and it is paired in the book with the Upanishads. So it is easier to compare those two if one has that theosophical text, for sure.
I didn't know that I knew Chinese went way back, but it sounds to me like it's about as far back as the Indian. I mean, it's very much alike. But and I thought you were talking theosophy a good bit, because I think that the theosophy was a bridge backward to the what you talked about today.
Yeah, and it's interesting how it may have influenced other parts of the world, and in Japan, and the whole Zen tradition may have had some of its roots in Tao because it spread.
So can we refer to Taoism or Taoism as in Chinese religion, as we do, Buddha's teaching as Buddhism? Do people do that?
Well, I mean, it's still alive, and there are people practicing Taoism all over the world. It seems that China went more the way of Confucianism, which was more the socio-political aspect and more of the more of a certain way of interpreting it. So I wouldn't say that the Chinese nation now are Taoists at all. But kind of like Buddhism, it's spread all over the world, and there are people attracted to Taoism and practicing it, in Europe and the West very, very fervently.
It's government, and a little section on government in your government and loneliness and humility. There's a lot of stuff about ethics in this, but it's just this is just a little bit of what he brought out.
Yeah.
So was Confucius a disciple of Lao Tzu?
That's what was suggested, that Lao Tzu may have been his teacher. We don't know for sure, but Confucius really confined his writings, his worldview very nationalistically.
Mhm.
Whereas Lao Tzu seems really much more universal.
So Lao Tzu, you said he dates back about 2,700 years ago. That's close to Buddha's time too, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, it seemed like they were saying that he preceded Buddha because the stories when the Buddhist monks came to China were that maybe it maybe changed over time, and they, you know, had this story that, oh, Buddha was a reincarnation of Lao Tse or Lao Tzu. That may or may not have been the case, but the Buddhists spreading Buddhism definitely made use of that as.
I think you mentioned over 2,500 years ago.
Yeah. So.
The Buddha was about 600 years before Christ, right? 1,000 years. I forget the exact date.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, about 600 years before Christ, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Lao Tzu did predate Buddha.
Yeah.
And also, you're right, Kat, there's so much parallel between the Gita and Lao Tzu's teaching as well. You know.
Yeah,
so,
that was really interesting. You know, in terms of action, non-action, spontaneous action that one doesn't have to think about, but also it's not impersonal in that you're not involved in it, but it's not ego action. It's just action that follows naturally without trying, without, you know, attempting to force a goal, that type of action.
You said get rid of value judgments. If you get rid of value judgments, there's no good and bad anymore, right?
Yeah, trying to rise above the pairs of opposites.
What a theory you mentioned. Being and not being, teachings without words. That's being in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely interesting. It's an interesting little book. I like the story about how he just wrote it down, and then that's the only surviving one we have.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
take a break before
yes,
the.
I guess I don't have a time on this thing. I don't know what time it is.
It's late.
12:23. Yeah.
Can we stop the recording?
Yeah.